Thank you for joining me on a video series that I'm calling A Journey of Understanding When You Are a Baptist Pastor and Your Son Comes Out as Gay. Yes, because that is a journey I have been on, and I've been likening it to sailing up a long lake where on one shore you have those who are fully affirming of same-sex marriage and full inclusion of those who are LGBTQ+ in the life of the church. And on the other shore, well, let's just say it's the more typical Baptist understanding of things, where same-sex marriage isn't a thing and the like. And so, as you can probably guess, as somebody who's a Baptist pastor, but also who has a son who is openly gay, I've been having mixed thoughts and feelings and being sailing between those two shores, shall we say. So thank you for joining me on this part of the journey. And for this part of the journey, I'm going back to a time that was very important on the journey, was something called a Generous Space Retreat. And this was a retreat held by an organization called Generous Space Ministries. And they would have retreats, and at each retreat they would have, usually the retreat was 3 days for those who attend, but they would have a pastor's day where pastors were invited to come and be a part of things and to be a part, to experience just everything there was to experience. And so I learned a lot on this retreat, too much to list here, but let me highlight a few. One is I learned what it felt like to be the one that people have suspicions about, the one that people are afraid of. Because as pastors, when you show up for Pastor's Day, your name tag is a different color. And people know that. And it's made very clear that some people have been really felt hurt by churches and by pastors. And so be aware of that and give people space. Kind of felt like the shoe was on the other foot, right? When you realize what it's like to be the one that's excluded in some way. So there's one thing. Here's another thing I learned, was that there's an expression called chosen families. I didn't know that before, that there are those who in the LGBTQ+ community, and maybe other people too, who really don't feel at home. They really don't feel they can call upon their own families to be family to them. So they have what's called chosen families, friends and important people in their lives that they feel they can call upon to be a family. So that raises the question for my wife and I. My wife was with me on this retreat. It raises the question, does our son feel at home, or have we made things such that he would feel he needed a chosen family? Good question. And so do our children feel at home with us? Do they feel at home? So chosen families, that was another thing. But here's something that struck me too at this retreat, was the worship. And each day began with worship. So on Pastor's Day, same thing, we began with worship. And the worship was joyful and Christian. And it was a beautiful experience of worship and no shying away from Jesus as Lord and Savior. It was a beautiful time of worship. So that was striking. And I'm not sure what I expected, but it was beautiful. I was glad to experience that. But here's another thing I learned, and really something that I had to rethink. It was really a cause for some rethinking. And it was on my go-to verse. Now, some of you may have joined me on this video series and have been disappointed that I have not dug into the Bible in an extensive way, into those passages, especially where Paul and other places too, where it speaks especially of sexuality. And I haven't done a lot of deep diving into those. And there's a reason for that. And that is because in my own journey, I came to the point of understanding that yes, there were different ways of looking at each of those, but I didn't really need to figure that out, because there was one go-to verse which to me trumped them all. To me, it set the theology of marriage and sexuality, that same-sex marriage is not a thing. And here is the verse. It's from Genesis 2:24. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. It's that verse, which, after all, Jesus quoted and the apostles quoted, that verse really set my theology for marriage and sexuality, and was the verse that kept me either on the typical Baptist shore or not sailing too far towards the affirming shore, no matter how much I felt for other reasons to be drawn towards the other shore, this verse kept me sailing back. And so this verse, to me, you could almost use the expression, I guess we do use the expression, it makes it normative. It's sexuality, that marriage is man, woman, it makes that normative. Now at the retreat, the presenter didn't actually get time to speak to this particular verse, but she spoke to other things that were very important to hear and explore. But I just saw it on the PowerPoint, Genesis 2:24, and all it said after that was prescriptive or descriptive. And I didn't need it to be explained to me. As soon as I saw that, it struck me as to, wow, boy, I've never thought through that before, and I need to go and think through that. So I did go away and think through that. Is this verse prescriptive or descriptive? Prescriptive would mean when we read this verse, it sets what sexuality and marriage is all about, and we prescribe it to everybody. We say this is what's normal, this is what thou shalt do, in other words. Whereas if it's descriptive, then it's describing the way God has set things up, but maybe there are those who are a bit different. So prescriptive or descriptive. And in my thinking, I came to realize that we already, I think all of us, shy away from it being prescriptive. What do I mean by that? Well, we don't force all men to be married. And notice how it's, if we're going to treat it literally as prescriptive, it's men that are focused on. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. So if we're truly making it prescriptive, we'll force all men to get married to a woman. We don't do that. In fact, sometimes we encourage men to not get married, especially if they're same-sex attracted. We encourage them to remain single for all their lives. So we already shy away from it being prescriptive. Therefore, should we see it, is it possible to see this as being more descriptive? Descriptive of what? Well, descriptive of how God has set marriage up to actually be a beautiful thing, and sexuality to be a beautiful thing. For example, I would say that my marriage to my wife Sandra is a far more beautiful relationship than any of the relationships that Solomon had with his, how many wives? 1,000 wives and concubines. I think there's something to be said about the beauty of my marriage to my wife Sandra, as opposed to that real polygamy of so many wives of the likes of Solomon. Yeah, he was the wisest man who ever lived, they say, but he must have fallen asleep during the sermon on Genesis 2:24. So there's descriptive of something that is beautiful, and truly marriage is beautiful and sexuality is beautiful. But does this mean that we begin to see, if it's descriptive then, does this mean that we say that, okay, marriage is normal, one man, one woman, that's normal, but singleness is abnormal, or same-sex marriage is abnormal? Would we put it that way? Well, as I began to think through that, in thinking through our 3 sons, I don't think of ourselves as having 2 normal boys and 1 abnormal boy, 2 boys that are attracted to the other sex and 1 boy that is attracted to the same sex. I don't think of them as being 2 normal, 1 abnormal. I think of them actually as being 3 unique boys, 3 unique individuals. They're each beautiful in their own individuality. And for my son who is gay, I would say that actually his being gay is a part of his beauty, part of what makes him beautiful, is part of what makes him unique. And he himself would describe himself, he would use the word queer. And if you were to wave a magic wand and maybe in your eyes fix my son so that he's no longer same-sex attracted, to fix my son so that there's not anything about him that you would describe as queer, if you were to do that, I would actually say, what did you do to my son? You've broken him. There was something beautiful about him, and now you've messed that up. Why would you do that? And maybe years ago I would have never thought I would have said that his queerness and his his being gay is a part of what's beautiful and beautifully unique about him. I never thought I would have said that, but I've lived with him long enough and known him as the gay person that he is, that I can't say he's abnormal. I have to say he's beautiful. That's just who he is to me, as my other two boys are. So yeah, so are we to think of it then that here's is describing what's normal of one man, one woman, that's what marriage is, and there's anything else is abnormal? Or can we not say that the single person, there's something that can be beautiful and unique about the single person? And maybe the same-sex attracted person, that there can be something beautiful and unique about the same-sex attracted person in a same-sex marriage, which, by the way, goes far beyond just about sex. It's also about companionship. It's about support throughout all of life, affection. There's so much about marriage, far more than just sexuality and sex. So is there not something beautiful about same-sex marriage? And again, I've known those who have been in same-sex marriages, and I would have to describe their marriages as something beautiful. So describing what's normal versus abnormal, I don't think that's the language I would want to use, but rather describing how God has created us to be in families, where there's this beautiful coming together of a man and woman, and naturally flows from that children. But that's not to say that there's not something beautiful when things are different, when there are those who don't possibly feel that they can fit that vision of beauty, that there's something else that's unique about them. That's the word I'd want to use, is unique, but that can be beautiful as well. And so we want to be, I think, open to that. So does this mean that because of this Generous Space retreat, that I ended up on the affirming shore? Well, not exactly. But what it did do was it created in me a deeper understanding of those who are on the affirming shore. Because before that moment, I would have said, to anybody on the affirming shore, I'd say, okay, I get that you're over there, but how could you be over there when Genesis 2:24 clearly says, but after this retreat, I can speak to those on that shore and say, okay, I can understand how you can get there. That makes sense to me now. I can also understand how there are those who are on the more traditional shore too. That makes sense to me too. I can also understand, and I think especially understand, those who are like me sailing between those two shores. I can understand that too. And so really I came to a new way of expressing things. You know, when people want to know, are you as a pastor and is your church welcoming and affirming, or welcoming and not affirming? Or I've since heard it shortened to welcoming and affirming, or just plain welcoming. And of course we want to fit welcoming in there always, right? But people want to know. And I came to the point of thinking and saying, you know, I don't want to be known as either one of those things. I want to be known as welcoming and understanding, that hopefully I can help you on your journey, and I will understand if you land on one shore or the other, or keep sailing in the middle with me. Welcoming and understanding. And are we creating spaces? You know, it's called Generous Space for a reason. Are we creating space for people to be able to think and rethink through things? Are we creating space for people to have mixed feelings and emotions and around all of this, and to be able to talk about those? Are we creating space even for ourselves to have mixed emotions and to have mixed thoughts, and to be able to think and rethink through these things? Are we extending to others and to ourselves generous space? That was a big question I came away from the Generous Space Retreat with. So thank you for sailing with me on this part of the journey. And if you haven't subscribed already, I hope you do so. But I'd love to keep sailing with you. So look forward to sailing with you next time. Thank you for sailing with me this time. Thank you.